Is the Celtics giving up too quickly on its own prospects? The release of Anton Watson after just 21 games in the G League raises an uncomfortable question. To what extent does the Celtics truly invest in the young players they draft? The decision exposes a strategic dilemma that could reveal a lot about the franchise's current philosophy. Watson was never seen as a high-ceiling player. That's true, but if the Celtics themselves decided to spend a draft pick to bring him in, why not give him time to develop within the system? The growth of a prospect is often not measured in weeks or just a few months, especially in a team that historically showed patience with talents like Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum. The choice to waive Watson to sign Miles Norris, a player that no other NBA franchise seemed interested in until now, raises an even deeper debate. Is the Celtics truly committed to long-term player development? Or is it simply using the draft as a tool to plug temporary holes in the G League roster? If the franchise views the draft process only as a bureaucratic step to fill out the secondary roster, maybe it's time to completely rethink its approach. Wouldn't it make more sense to trade picks for veterans who can contribute immediately in the NBA? The risk of investing in young players is inherent, but giving up on a prospect too quickly can create a vicious cycle where the team itself stops, believing in its bets before they even have a chance to succeed. Looking around the NBA, it's easy to find examples of players who blossomed after years of development, even those who started quietly. The Miami Heat and Golden State Warriors, for instance, are known for betting on long-term projects and reaping the rewards. Why does the Celtics, a franchise that prides itself on culture and continuity, seem increasingly impatient with its own young players? The decision also raises an uncomfortable question for the fan base. How many talents could the Celtics be letting slip away due to a lack of patience? If Watson breaks out elsewhere in the coming years, this decision will be seen as a strategic mistake, another chapter in the growing list of prospects who never truly got a chance in Boston. Are Joe Mazzulla and Brad Stevens creating a system that undervalues young player development? Since Joe Mazzulla took over as head coach of the Boston Celtics, the team's philosophy has been clear: win now, at any cost. But while that mindset makes sense for a team in its championship window, it carries a dangerous consequence: the near-total abandonment of young player development, something that was once a hallmark of the franchise during the Brad Stevens era as head coach. Looking at recent years, the pattern is undeniable. No player drafted since Grant Williams in 2019 has carved out a consistent role in the main rotation. Peyton Pritchard, despite his quality, spent entire seasons buried at the end of the bench. Aaron Nesmith only found consistent minutes after being traded to the Indiana Pacers. Others like Romeo Langford, Yam Madar, and J.D. Davison never even got a real chance before being discarded. This approach raises an unsettling question. Is the Celtics becoming a franchise that exists only to polish veteran players and chase immediate results? If the sole focus is the present, who will take care of the future? Mazzulla and Stevens' strategy may make sense in the short term, especially with a star-studded roster. However, recent NBA dynasties show how internal player development is crucial for long-term success. The Golden State Warriors built their dominance on homegrown talent like Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, all developed within the franchise system. The Miami Heat turned young players like Tyler Herro and Bam Adebayo into cornerstones while still competing at the highest level. The argument that there are no available minutes doesn't fully hold up. Championship teams like the Denver Nuggets and Milwaukee Bucks have found ways to keep young players developing while contending for titles. The difference is that those franchises understand that blending veterans with prospects is an efficient way to sustain success, not just a risky gamble. What's even more concerning is the potential impact this philosophy could have on the franchise's reputation among future prospects. Why would a young player sign a two-way contract or choose the Celtics as a destination if they know there's little chance of earning real developmental opportunities? In the long run, This could push talent away and create a generational gap at the foundation of the team. If the Celtics truly want to build something sustainable, they need to find a balance between the pressure to win titles and the investment in young talent. It's not about sacrificing the championship chase. It's about recognizing that the next star might already be on the roster as long as they're given time and patience to flourish. Winning now is important, but what happens when the massive contracts of Tatum, Brown, and Holiday eventually expire? Was Miles Norris signed just because he fits, not because he has real talent? The Boston Celtics signing of Miles Norris raises a question that goes beyond the player himself. How much does the franchise truly prioritize raw talent over simply finding pieces that fit into a pre-established system? The 6'9" forward checks all the boxes the Celtics look for: a versatile player with a solid three-point shot and the ability to defend multiple positions. But is that enough to justify the signing? Norris was never viewed as a high-upside NBA prospect. He went undrafted and had to carve out his career in the G League, where his numbers are solid but far from spectacular. What stands out is how the Celtics seem more focused on finding players who merely fit into their philosophy, rather than developing talent that could become foundational pieces for the future. The decision also highlights the lack of opportunities for young players already on the roster. Why take a gamble on Norris instead of accelerating the development of Jordan Walsh, a player the franchise drafted and who has already shown flashes of promise? Why not give more minutes to J.D. Davison, who has spent the last 2 seasons being molded within the Celtics' own G League system? Signing Norris gives the impression that the franchise is constantly looking for shortcuts, opting for external options that seem more NBA-ready in the short term, even if it comes at the expense of nurturing its own prospects. The danger of this approach is creating a vicious cycle where the team never builds anything sustainable for the long term. If the primary criteria for signing players is how they fit today, the Celtics risk becoming a franchise that recycles disposable pieces without ever developing a solid homegrown foundation. Players like Norris might serve a tactical role now, but they're unlikely to be the ones carrying the franchise forward when the current stars fade away. Moreover, the signing sparks a broader debate about what it really means to fit into a system. Fit should be a byproduct of development, not a shortcut to bypass the process. Teams like the Denver Nuggets and San Antonio Spurs built their identities around players who were developed to fit, not simply picked because they already checked the right boxes. The Celtics are flirting with becoming a franchise without an identity, one where the system matters more than the players who sustain it. That mindset might deliver short-term results, but is it killing the chances of uncovering the next unexpected talent who could reshape the team's future? The real question is, did the Celtics sign Norris because they see him as a player capable of growing within the franchise, or simply because he's another generic piece who slots into the scheme without asking questions? If the answer is the latter, the franchise might be sacrificing its own future just to keep the machine running in the present. Is the Celtics becoming a lazy franchise in talent development? The Denver Nuggets have turned players like Christian Braun and Anton Watson into playoff contributors. The Miami Heat builds competitive rosters with undrafted players like Caleb Martin and Duncan Robinson. These examples show that even in championship-contending teams, there is still room for young players to grow and become key pieces. Meanwhile, the Celtics have one of the most expensive rosters in the NBA and have failed to develop a single role player since Grant Williams. The question that arises is whether the true problem lies not in the quality of the prospects, but in the organization's laziness to invest time and patience in developing their own talent. The process of nurturing young players requires dedication, planning, and a culture of patience, something that seems to have been abandoned by the franchise in recent years. The signing of Miles Norris is yet another symptom of this superficial approach. Instead of investing in internal projects like Jordan Walsh or J.D. Davison, the Celtics seem to prefer the easier route, signing veterans or players who already fit a pre-established mold, even if their ceiling is clearly limited. It's a safer path, but one that could come at a high cost for the franchise's future. The problem becomes even more pressing when looking at the Celtics' recent history. Romeo Langford, Aaron Nesmith, Peyton Pritchard, all were prospects who, for various reasons, never got a consistent string of minutes to prove their worth. Did they all truly fail, or did the organization fail to provide the structure they needed to develop? The lack of patience may guarantee immediate results, but in the long term, it undermines the team's sustainability. Teams that focus on internal development are able to maintain competitive rosters even during periods of transition. Just look at the Golden State Warriors, who found key pieces in Jordan Poole and Kevin Looney for the team's renewal without needing to turn to the external market. The Celtics are at risk of becoming a franchise that only lives in the present, with no plan for the future. If the culture of development isn't restored, the team could end up being held hostage by millionaire contracts and short-term veterans, with no base of homegrown talent to sustain the next era. The greatest irony is that the Celtics themselves have a legacy of some of the NBA's greatest legends, all developed within the franchise. From Larry Bird to Paul Pierce, Boston's identity has always been built around players who grew up wearing green and white. So, what has changed now? Immediate success may justify this approach, but the question the franchise needs to ask is, for how long? Is the obsession with the perfect fit killing the development process? In recent years, the Celtics have been focused on finding players who fit into the system even before knowing if they are truly talented. Miles Norris is another example of this, a forward who can shoot threes but has shown nothing to indicate a high ceiling. This pragmatic approach might seem smart in the short term, but it reveals a limited and potentially dangerous vision for the franchise's future. The obsession with immediate fit places the system above talent, as if the tactical scheme is more important than the individual player's ability. This mindset may keep the team competitive now, but what happens when the stars get older, or when the system needs to be adapted? The Celtics are creating a cycle where there will never be a natural team renewal because they don't make the effort to develop their own players. Developing talent is a long process, full of mistakes and successes, but one that tends to yield lasting results. Players like Jimmy Butler, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Kawhi Leonard didn't come into the NBA ready. They were shaped over years by franchises that had the patience to invest in them. Meanwhile, the Celtics seem more focused on finding pre-molded pieces that fit as gears in a rigid system. This mentality might be a direct reflection of the pressure for immediate results. With an expensive roster and championship expectations, there is little room for mistakes. But is this approach exactly what's preventing the Celtics from becoming a franchise that combines present success with future sustainability? The risks of becoming a disposable franchise that only survives while its stars are in their prime is real. Furthermore, this obsession with fit creates an unwelcoming environment for young talent. Players need space to make mistakes, experiment, and evolve. But in the current Celtics environment, any mistake seems to be seen as a fatal flaw. If the franchise doesn't change this mindset, it will continue losing promising talents before even discovering what they could become. The most ironic thing is that the greatest dynasties in NBA history have always combined development with competitiveness. The Spurs did this with Kawhi Leonard, the Warriors with Draymond Green and Jordan Poole, and the Celtics themselves were an example of this in the past. So, why has the process now become a burden instead of an investment? Is the Celtics so obsessed with finding the perfect player that they're ignoring raw talents that could be molded? Maybe the real question is, when did the Celtics stop believing in their own ability to develop players?